Good evening, dear ones. Good to see you tonight. Hope you're doing well. Our study of 2 Corinthians is drawing near to a close. We see tonight we're doing chapter 11, and then the next lesson, a week from tonight, chapters 12 and 13, and that'll conclude it. And I was going to look today to see what's coming next, but I did not look, so I will look that up. This handout that I just gave you, a two-sided handout, one side says accusations and criticisms, and the other side says correlating 2 Corinthians 11 with Acts. So let's look at that second side, correlating 2 Corinthians 11 with Acts. When Paul gets to the point in this chapter, as we divide the book up, he's going to say all the things that he suffered. And it got me thinking, well, where does it talk about those different things that he's listing? And so this correlates somewhat the things that he mentions that we know happened in the book of Acts and where you can find them. So that's what this side is. Now the other side, accusations and criticisms, if you've been watching as we're going through, there are all sorts of things that are implied that they've been saying about Paul, detracting and insulting and assaulting his character. So giving him a real hard time. And I kind of summarized them under the accusations and criticisms. And so you can see all the different things that he's been addressing. I just kind of collected them all there for you. But it's interesting, as he is combating what they've come around to believe, he does make the comment at the very bottom of that accusations and criticisms, a quote from 2 Corinthians 12:19. Have you been thinking all along that we've been defending ourselves to you? He knows he's not guilty of anything, and he doesn't have to defend himself as though he were in some sort of a court of law, because it's not that kind of an accusation. They've gotten all twisted in their heads, and he's trying to straighten them back out. So in a way, that's different than a defense. And he says it's not a defense, but it sounds like a defense because they've been so rude to them there. And we're going to talk about that today as we go on through. But that's setting up what we're going to talk about. And that sheet is just for you to be able to kind of get the big picture in what we've been doing chapter by chapter and what's been covered chapter by chapter. So the division of this epistle, chapters 1 through 9, his response to a crisis that's been resolved. And that was the crisis dealt with in the first epistle to the Corinthians. And so now we're in the section 10 through 13, which is his response to a new crisis, which is their estimation of him, their lowly estimation of him, he who should have been highly esteemed in their eyes, and he's got to bring them back to right thinking. So we're going to focus in here. We already did chapter 10. We're going to do chapter 11 tonight, and then, Lord willing, chapters 12 and 13 next week. So we're in this section. He's defending his ministry. He's going to do his foolish boasting and sufferings tonight. Then we're going to talk about his visions next time. So he says in the first verse of chapter 11, I wish that you would bear with me in a little foolishness. Do bear with me, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. I don't know if you recall in the story of Jesus and his birth that when Joseph heard that Mary was pregnant, they were already betrothed and he decided to put her away privily, privately. Let me go over the process back then, all right? Generally, there were two ceremonies involved in a wedding. There was the betrothal, and then there was the wedding. But the betrothal, and they're usually a year apart, about a year apart, and the betrothal was as formal a deal as the wedding, but it was in advance of the wedding, and there were to be no relations until the wedding. So if you're betrothed, you're promised to your spouse, but then you've got to keep yourself a virgin until the wedding. And so that's what he's talking about here. You know, as you've become a Christian, in effect, you're betrothed. But then when the Lord returns, or when we die, that's when the union's going to take place. And so I'm trying to keep you pure, he says, and I'm trying to keep you ready for that wedding. But you're already betrothed. That figure works out real well when you understand that the betrothal and the wedding were different things, but they were both binding. And if you wanted to cancel, break up after a betrothal, it was a divorce. It was a divorce. It was that serious a relationship. So he's jealous with a godly jealousy. He's betrothed them to Christ, one husband, and he wants to present them that way. And so he's fighting for that. He's fighting for that because they have gotten some bad ideas. And these bad ideas could lead them away from Christ. And that's what he's worried about. So we're going to contrast, or he's going to contrast himself with the false apostles. And I get the impression from this that the false apostles looked really good. Really flashy. They had status. They were orators. Maybe they were wealthy. They demanded to be treated with respect. And I get the idea from what we read that Paul struggled with eye problems, that his personal appearance wasn't so flashy, that he looked kind of weak in some instances. I mean, it's not like Saul, who was head and shoulders above everybody and good looking and all of that. Paul seems like he's just nowhere near the appearance of these other guys. So these other guys are getting all the respect and he's not getting any. But when you look at the credentials, he's credentialed and they're not. But the congregations come around and got a bad idea. It reminded me of a thing that I heard about. I think it took place in Michigan years ago. Manager gets to a supermarket early in the morning to open up, and he discovers it's been broken into. The door's open, busted open. So a quick look through the store shows nothing missing, nothing out of place. So they open at the regular time, but they have to close a few hours later when they realize what the vandals did was switch the price tags on all sorts of stuff. A can of vegetables, $10, and a steak, 50 cents, and they messed everything up. and they just said, we gotta stop and we gotta put all the prices back where they're supposed to be. But it's like in Corinth, they switched the price tags. They were devaluing the real apostle and they were valuing the false apostle. And they just got all twisted in their heads. And so he's trying to straighten them back out. So what he talks about in verses 4 and following of these false apostles, in verse 4, for if someone comes, and someone, he never does mention the name of the person or persons that are doing this. So he just, he's referencing them. You know they're there, you know what they're doing, but you don't know who they are. If someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. You guys are ready to fall for all these counterfeits that shouldn't be valued. In verse 5, indeed, I consider that I'm not in the least inferior to these super apostles. And I wonder if he said it like that too. Well, it's in a letter, you know. He's really going after him here with a lot of, I guess, irony or sarcasm. Well, you got some super apostles there. And but he says, Mike, I'm not the least inferior to them. Even if I am unskilled in speaking, there's where we get that he's not an orator. I am not so in knowledge. There was an old song by the group War, Why Can't We Be Friends? Why can't we be friends? Why can't we? There's one line in there, I may not always speak right, but at least I know what I'm talking about. That was his line. Why can't we be friends? But it's like that. I might not be able to say it as powerfully as these people and, you know, wax an elephant, but I know what I'm talking about, and I've got the knowledge, and these guys don't. So, indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. You know, he had taught these folks the right thing the right way, and they've just slipped. But they were proclaiming another Jesus. They had a different spirit. They were preaching a different gospel. Evidently, they were skilled orators. Going on in verse 7, it seems like these false teachers are proud. And I don't know, nowadays you hear people say they were prideful, but proud used to work. I don't know when we switched to prideful, but in verse 7, or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you might be exalted? Because I preach God's gospel to you free of charge. Evidently, when he was there, he didn't think it was appropriate to take any support from them. So he did not accept any, what you might call wages or support, any money from them, because he didn't feel they were ready for that. But he got support from other places. Do you see? When I was with you, I was in need and was in need. I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. If you look at the book of Philippians, his epistle to the Philippians, he talks about how they were with him in the support of the gospel from the beginning. And they were always helpful to him, and they had been ever helpful to him. And that was enough. He said, I'll get it from this other congregation that's a little more secure, maybe a little more stable, been around longer. I'm not going to take something from the newbies here in Corinth. So I refrained, and I will refrain from burdening you in any way. Evidently, the false teachers were taking support, and they said, you know, that Paul didn't take support from you either means he's really not qualified and he knows it. You know, he knows he shouldn't be taking your money. Or maybe he doesn't love you enough to take your money, you know, and like we love you and take your money. So they've got this all twisted around, and these poor guys are falling for it. In verse 10, as the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do love you. Verse 11, or verse 12, and what I am doing, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work on the same terms as we do. So they're boastful about what they've accomplished when in fact you think they probably accomplished next to nothing. This is the kind of group that slips in after somebody else does the building and claims the credit, and maybe takes that group that's healthy and steers it the way they want them to go instead of the right way. In verse 13, for such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. This is all going to work out in the end. But as you go on, there's more things that are going to come out as we continue. In verse 16, I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast a little, like these other guys are boasting. What I'm saying with this boastful confidence, I say not as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. For you gladly bear with fools, being wise yourselves. And that's sarcasm, because they were already bearing with these fools who were claiming to be apostles and they weren't. For you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, or devours you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. To my shame, I must say we were too weak for that. We didn't slap anybody when we were there. Have you ever heard of a teacher slapping a student? There was something as a coach, coaches do it every once in a while in the heat of a game. But I remember there was a story of a fella who wrote, I think, a book about loves. It was real popular about 20 years ago. He went, he got to study with some Swami, I guess, over in India. And he got there, he's so excited. And he's just talking about, I've got this idea for a book and I want to do these things. And he's going on. And the guy slapped him in the face and said, stop running through my mind with your muddy feet. And he put up with it. And it's like, okay, this is how he teaches. So, all right. And what are you going to do? But, if you get into a situation like this, there ought to be a lot of bells and whistles going off. This is not right. But, I think what happened here, these false apostles had a toxic relationship with these saints. They were taking advantage of them. Paul says enslaving them, slapping them, demanding they respect them, demanding that they pay them. They were doing all of these things while not being qualified to teach as they were teaching. And this congregation had fallen into it and fallen for it. And I don't believe this was the last time that happened. This happens. And so, just an awful situation they'd fallen into. Okay. What about the Apostle Paul? Well, take about every one of those characteristics that we used to describe the false apostles and turn it around 180 degrees, and now you've got the Apostle Paul. He proclaimed Jesus. He proclaimed the true gospel. He had a godly spirit. He wasn't a skilled orator. He had been humble when he was among them. He had not taken any support. He was an honest workman. He was doing the work, and he was a slave to the saints instead of enslaving the saints. I forget where he says, I think it might be later in this book, I am willing to spend and be spent for you. I'm pouring myself out here. I'm giving you, more than I'm receiving, and that's the real characteristics of him. So they got all twisted up. Here, did you want to say something? That's right. Let him be accursed. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what Gamaliel said in Acts chapter 5 when they were going to squash what the apostles were doing. They said, men, he said to the Sanhedrin, men, watch out now. If this is of man, it's going to come to nothing on its own. But if it's of God, you could be standing opposing God here. And you don't want to be that person either. So, yeah. So, Paul gets into his own true credentials. And this is why he kind of apologizes at the start, because he normally wouldn't talk about this stuff. He wouldn't go on and list his credentials. But since they've fallen for the credentials of the posers, he says, look at, if we're going to brag a little bit, okay, I'm going to brag. I'm going to tell you about my real credentials. In verse 21, but whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I'm speaking as a fool. I dare to boast of that. Are they Hebrews? And evidently these false teachers were Hebrews from a Hebrew background. So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one. I'm talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, countless beatings, and often near death. All of this in the service of the Lord. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. They weren't supposed to give more than 40 lashes. If they gave more than 40 lashes to someone, they'd get it themselves, whoever was delivering the lash. So what they did was they counted carefully, and I believe they had a handle with like 3 cords on it. So was it 13 blows with that? They'd count them, and that's 39. They'd stop one short. The Romans didn't have any limit like that. The Romans thrashed you. They'd thrash you as much as they wanted to, but the Jews stopped at 39. So 5 times he's gone through that. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea. On frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger from in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from other things, there is the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who is weak? And am I not weak? Who's made to fall? And am I not indignant? This is the best list that we've got of all that Paul has suffered. And it's amazing. I heard a poem about a month ago, Have You No Scars? And it was talking to Christians, about, has none of this happened to you yet? And very little of this has happened to me yet. I should probably be going places where this would happen, but that's not what I've done. But when you look at what Paul has gone through, these are true credentials of an apostle. This means he's been out there doing the work. He's been doing the work. He's been suffering through all of these things for the Lord. And you get the impression that the other folks have not suffered any of this, anything like it. Questions, comments so far through verse 29? Hamer? Yeah. Might have been 26 when he was talking with Herod. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If anybody ever accused Paul of making the switch from being Saul of Tarsus to Paul, Apostle Paul, for money or for fame or for, some great outcome of whatever kind, where is it? Where is it? What was anything in that neighborhood that he got for this? As a matter of fact, he talks about at the start of this, the status that he had, and I think in, is it Galatians where he talks about it as well, but he says that I was a Hebrew of Hebrews, but all of those things I counted but dung to serve Christ. I've counted it all garbage. He walked away from the status that these false teachers are possessing and claiming to be the fellow that went through this on the screen there. So, just amazing what he, and brethren, they probably should have seen the scars on him. I mean, he had to have. He had to show that the evidence of these things in his body. It sounds like he was used up. And it also sounds like he had a problem with his eyes, right? He had a thorn in the flesh, and it might have still been the Galatians when he told them, when I was with you, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. And so evidently it was an eye problem at least. And he had that, and he still overcame. The other thing that he is talking about here is his anxiety for all the churches, his care for the churches. And, our Lord has an affinity with his disciples. As a matter of fact, when Saul was accosted on the road to Damascus, he asked Saul, "Why are you persecuting me?" Jesus said that. And of course, Jesus was at the right hand of God at the time, and Paul couldn't reach him there. But Saul was persecuting his followers, and Jesus took that personally. You're doing that to me because you're doing it to them. And so here, I think Paul's got a similar affinity with the folks, the saints in the churches. And they're going through things. He's going through those things too. When I was teaching, I took all sorts of classes in the topic that I used to teach, and no classes about how to teach it. If you get a master's in math education, you take half in math and half in how to teach math. But I didn't do that. So I had to learn some things about teaching. And one of the gems that somebody handed me was, he said, in every classroom, somebody's getting built up. You want it to be the students, but there are toxic times when the professor's getting built up at the expense of the students. Have you ever heard of that? Where, somebody does something and you belittle it, or you say, of course that's wrong, and you're feeling, the professor's feeling smarter because he's pushing the students down. He's not edifying and not building them up. And it sounds like this is a toxic relationship there. These false apostles are getting built up. They're getting fed, they're getting respected, they're getting paid, and they're able to slap these folks in the course of what they're doing, and it's just awful. And here's Paul, and he did everything right, and he's getting run down by these guys, and they're thinking he's lesser, when in fact he is much more. So, yeah, it gets twisted sometimes. And you just wonder, how could all of these things be overlooked? All that he suffered, how could they miss that? And then give the attention to those who actually had, lesser credentials. I don't understand it, but it can happen. Clinton.
In the beginning of the chapter, you talk about the craftiness
Yes.
of Satan.
Yes.
So, in order for me to win you over from someone and telling the truth, I'm going to take some of what you do and mix in some other stuff and make it more appealing to people. You want to get the shine out of it.
That's right.
The true thing.
That's right.
And like you said, knowledge is better than the shining out.
That's right.
That's what happens even on jobs. Somebody talk a good game, but don't know nothing.
That's right. Yeah. Absolutely. Talk about deception, and it's already made the comparison with Satan and deceiving Mother Eve. Do you remember how he deceived her? We've got some minutes here. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 3, and let's look at what he did to Mother Eve. Genesis 3, verse 1, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden?' Really? Is God trying to starve you? Is he just nuts? God hadn't said anything like that. And here's Satan implying it. And getting Mother Eve on the defensive already. No, he didn't say that. And it's just a very crafty opening, and it's not an outright lie, but it's assuming some things that are foolish about God, and it's crafty. It's a crafty way to start. But the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that's in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' So that's what God said, and she got that right. Well, here comes the lie. The serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil.' There's the lie. And somehow with that first statement, he'd softened her up, and she bought it. And there we go. And so, yeah, folks can be very, very crafty, and evidently these people were. They were very crafty, and they sold this to a congregation. And so here's the man coming back and Paul trying to make it right. So the last little bit of the chapter here, verses 30 and on, "If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, he who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. At Damascus," and I guess maybe as he was writing, he forgot to throw this in, so he just wanted to get the basket story in there, because it's a good one. It should have been in the list of the things that he suffered. But in Damascus, the governor under King Aretas was guarding the city of Damascus in order to seize me. But I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. And you almost get the idea he's going to say, why don't you ask those false apostles if they ever had to get out of town in a basket? You know, like that was something that, yeah, I don't know. But that was even in the early stages. That was wasn't that in Acts chapter 11, or the end of chapter 9, I think, yeah. So it was just right after his conversion. So he jumped right into the fire. Out of the frying pan into the fire. What else, dear ones?
Christians aren't right. They read Paul, apostle, and that's not right. They don't think because the apostle is scared of him. And that's because they don't want to do with him. Into what happened was they were scared of him because he was supposed to be a Christian.
He's a bounty hunter.
Christian outside, if they want to get a million here, he's like, oh no,
Yeah.
I'm going another direction.
He might have gone to the Jehu school of bounty hunting, you know, like, yeah, I'm a Baal worshiper now. Let's get everybody in here, and we're going to worship big time. And then he killed them all. So yeah, you know, I'm a Christian. Let's get everybody together. And yeah, they were suspicious of that. But you know how he overcame that with the brethren? Barnabas lent his credibility, and he said, "Hey guys, I've been with him, and it's the real deal. It's the real conversion," which makes him one of the most important converts, because when somebody from the top of the other side comes over to your side, that's news. That's big news. And that's what you hate, is to see that. If you get somebody who's got a real high security clearance in the Army and he defects to the other side, boy, they make a big deal out of that, you know. Yes. Yes. Yeah. They've been saying yes right along. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to be wary that you know that could happen. Yeah. Yeah. Scott, would you go ahead and ring the bell a little early? I think I'm running out of material here. And be done a little early tonight. So, Paul and the false apostles. I lived in North Carolina for a year and a half. I think it was a year and a half. Their state motto, anybody know this North Carolina state motto? To be, not to seem. To be, not to seem. To be the real thing. And I thought that was a great motto, because these false apostles seemed like super apostles. But Paul was the super apostle. And bless his heart, he's having to defend himself. He didn't have anything to defend. He was doing fine. He was in the right relationship with God. Everything's fine with him. But he's fighting for them, and he's fighting for their right thinking, because they had been betrothed to Christ, and they didn't even know that these false apostles were leading them astray. So, yeah. Interesting study here. We're going to have some more to say about it in chapters 12 and 13. He's going to tell us in chapter 12 about a revelation or something that he was able to see that is just, even for him, hard to describe. But he's going to describe another credential, another qualification that's very different than the, what these other guys have gone through. See if anybody else has gone through that. Yeah. So, chapters 12 and 13. 13's pretty short. So look at those two for next time, if you will. And then we'll be we'll be done with the study. All right, let's be dismissed until the devotional.
.48, 448. How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that He should give His only Son to make a wretch His treasure. How great the pain of searing loss! The Father turns His face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon a cross, my sin upon His shoulders. Ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held Him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom. Number 641 will be the invitation song, 641. Don't want to leave without the opportunity to extend the invitation for anyone who has heard the gospel and has understood it and is ready to make that decision. We have baptistry. It can be ready about an hour, I'm told, about an hour to get it ready, and we can use it at, if that is your desire to do so. And if you need prayers, or if you're dealing with sin in a public manner for those who are Christians, that's what this family is here for. So if there's anything you need to be made known, let us do so, and we'll sing number 641. We'll sing all 4 verses, chorus last. Who will follow Jesus, standing for the right, holding up his banner in the thickest fight, listening for his orders, ready to obey? Who will follow Jesus, serving him today? Who will follow Jesus in life's busy ways, working for the Master, giving him the praise, earnest in his vineyard, honoring his laws, faithful to his counsel, watchful for his cause? Who will follow Jesus when the tempter charms, fleeing then for safety to the Savior's arms, trusting in his mercy, trusting in his power, seeking fresh renewals of his grace each hour? Who will follow Jesus in his work of love, leading others to him, lifting prayers above? Courage, faithful servant, in his word we see, on our side forever will this Savior be. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? I am on the Lord's side, Master, here am I. We have the bulletins up, Jeff said, for Dan King, the gospel meeting. They have their topics picked out for May 17th and 18th, so go ahead and take a look at that. He has those published for what he'll be speaking on both those days. So let's keep that in mind. Other than that, is there anything else?
Mark Beans will be in town this weekend. He is coming for a memorial for his aunt, I think, who lived in Fredericksburg, and she's passed, so he's in town for that. I asked him to speak for us Sunday morning. He said he would be glad to, so he's going to be here. So we're looking forward to that. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, it'd be good to see Mark again. If there's nothing else, Hamer, I think you have the closing prayer.